the sweltering heat of July 1947, the small town of Marfa, Texas, was buzzing with whispers. The convent on the outskirts, an old stone building that had stood for nearly a century, was usually quiet and solemn, but that summer something felt off. Villagers had noticed that the nuns seemed restless. Sister Margaret, the eldest, walked the halls late at night, murmuring prayers that sounded strained, almost fearful. Sister Anne and Sister Cecilia spent hours locked away in the convent's library, poring over ancient texts that no one else was allowed to touch. On a humid morning, the town awoke to a mystery that would haunt them for decades. Father O'Malley, who lived a few miles down the road, arrived at the convent to find the heavy wooden doors wide open. Inside, the air was eerily still. The chapel's candles were burned down to stubs, and the faint smell of incense lingered in the hallways. But there was no sign of the sisters. Their rooms were untouched, beds made, personal belongings neatly in place. It was as if they had vanished mid-step. Local authorities were called immediately, but their search yielded nothing. No footprints led away from the convent, not even in the nearby dirt paths that circled the building. The dogs brought in to track scents refused to move, whining and pacing as if sensing something invisible. Investigators scoured the nearby woods, the dry creek beds, and the abandoned barns, but the three nuns had left no trace. The police were baffled, and rumors began to spread faster than facts. Villagers whispered of strange occurrences in the nights leading up to the disappearance. Lamps flickering with no breeze, the sound of chanting carried on the wind, and shadows moving along the convent walls when no one was there. Some claimed to have seen the sisters wandering the grounds late at night in a trance-like state, murmuring words no one could understand. Others swore the nuns had been warning each other about something coming for them, but no one could explain what it meant. By the end of the first week, the disappearance had become the town's obsession. The local newspaper ran stories questioning whether the nuns had left voluntarily, fled, or, heaven forbid, fallen victim to something sinister. Families in Marfa began locking their doors early, fearing that whatever had taken the sisters could strike again, even decades later. Old-timers would speak of that summer in hushed tones, a lingering dread that no explanation could fully erase. The convent, once a place of peace, had become a monument to the unknown, shrouded in fear, mystery, and a sense that something unearthly had begun its silent work. As news of the nuns' disappearance spread, law enforcement from across Texas converged on the convent. Sheriff Tom Reynolds, a grizzled man with decades on the force, was assigned to lead the investigation. From the moment he stepped onto the convent grounds, he felt an unease that he couldn't explain. The place was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He and his deputies began a painstaking search of every room, every closet, and every hidden nook. But there was no sign of the sisters. It was like the convent itself had swallowed them whole. Detectives extended the search to the surrounding woods, calling in local trackers and even cattle herders who knew the land intimately. Faint footprints were discovered at the edge of the tree line, appearing to lead into the dense forest, but they stopped abruptly in the tall grass, as though the earth itself had consumed them. The search parties scoured the area for days, combing through dry riverbeds, rocky hills, and abandoned cabins. Yet, every trail ran cold. Night after night, searchlights swept across the terrain, but the nuns were nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, whispers of something sinister began to reach the authorities. Locals claimed they had seen figures moving silently among the trees at dusk, too fleeting to identify. Some said they heard chanting and strange music drifting from the convent grounds, though the building had been empty during the day. Investigators noted that the chapel doors, which had been locked from the inside before the disappearance, now swung open with no explanation. The more they searched, the more the convent itself seemed to resist discovery, as if hiding secrets it had carried for decades. Sheriff Reynolds also discovered hints that the sisters had been unusually secretive in the weeks before vanishing. Neighbors recalled seeing Sister Margaret carrying bundles of old papers to the basement late at night. Sister Anne was observed slipping out behind the convent for long periods without explanation, and Sister Cecilia's usual warmth had turned cold and distant. The detectives began to wonder, was this disappearance simply a case of someone running away? Or was something darker, perhaps beyond human comprehension, at play? Every interview and eyewitness account only added layers of confusion and dread. Public pressure mounted as the investigation dragged on. Newspapers published sensational headlines speculating about cults, kidnappings, and supernatural forces. The town of Marfa became a place of quiet terror, with townsfolk locking their doors and avoiding the convent entirely. Even the most skeptical officers found themselves questioning reality, especially when some claimed to hear whispers on the wind or catch shadows flitting through the woods at night. The official investigation had started with logic and reason, but it was quickly becoming clear that whatever had taken the nuns was not bound by the normal rules of the world. Decades passed, and the convent fell into disrepair. By 2023, the building was largely abandoned, its once pristine stone walls cracked and weathered by time. The town had mostly forgotten the 3 missing nuns, except for the occasional whispers from the elderly residents who still remembered that summer of 1947. When demolition crews arrived to tear down the building, they expected nothing more than dust, crumbling walls, and old memories. But what they found would reopen a case that had been cold for nearly 76 years. During the early stages of demolition, a worker's hammer struck something hollow behind the basement's far wall. Curious, they began to chip away the bricks, revealing a narrow doorway hidden beneath decades of plaster and paint. Inside, the air was thick, heavy, and musty, carrying the faint scent of burnt incense. Dust swirled in the weak shafts of sunlight that penetrated the basement, and the workers hesitated, uneasy about disturbing whatever had been hidden for so long. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, with stone walls etched in strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Inside the chamber, the floor was scorched in intricate patterns that resembled an ancient ritual circle. Oddly, the scorch marks were precise, as though something, human or otherwise, had carefully traced them with fire. Broken candles, now blackened and crumbling, were scattered along the edges of the circle. Faded ribbons and scraps of cloth hinted at ceremonial garb, while the lingering smell of burnt herbs and incense made the air nearly suffocating. Every corner of the hidden room seemed charged with a strange energy, as though the room itself remembered the events that had transpired decades before. The workers found more than just burned symbols. In a small iron chest tucked into the corner, they discovered a collection of old manuscripts and journals, carefully bound, but yellowed and brittle with age. One journal, in particular, caught their attention. It was signed by Sister Margaret. Her handwriting, elegant at first, grew jagged and frantic as the pages progressed. The entries described nightly rituals, protective prayers, and increasingly fearful warnings about a presence the sisters believed was lurking just beyond the convent walls. As the workers flipped through the pages, a sense of unease settled over them, as if the room itself was watching. Experts were called in to document the hidden chamber, from archaeologists to historians and even paranormal investigators. The symbols on the walls were unlike anything documented in Texas at the time, an eerie mix of Christian iconography and cryptic runes. Small artifacts scattered across the floor suggested that the sisters had conducted some form of ritual, perhaps to protect themselves or the convent. But the notes in the journals hinted at something that had gone terribly wrong. The hidden room, untouched for more than 3/4 of a century, had preserved secrets that no one alive had ever seen until now. Among the scattered artifacts in the hidden chamber, one discovery sent chills down the spines of everyone present: a tattered leather-bound journal belonging to Sister Margaret. The cover was cracked and worn, but the pages inside were remarkably intact. At first, her handwriting was neat and orderly, recording mundane events and prayers. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted. The words became erratic, filled with fear and desperation, as if the very act of writing was a plea to an unseen force. Certain pages were smudged with what looked like tears, or perhaps something more sinister. The journal detailed the sisters' attempts to perform protective rituals over the convent, prayers meant to safeguard them from evil forces they believed were encroaching. Sister Margaret wrote about shadows moving in corners, voices whispering in empty halls, and objects shifting on their own. She documented nights when Sister Anne and Sister Cecilia refused to sleep, pacing the halls and chanting in languages no one alive could recognize. The final entries, written in a frantic scrawl, described a presence demanding a sacrifice and the sisters' growing terror as they realized the ritual was spiraling out of control. The journal also included sketches of the ritual circle found on the floor of the chamber. Strange symbols intertwined with Christian crosses, forming a pattern that was both beautiful and horrifying. Notes in the margins suggested the sisters had believed this ritual would create a protective barrier, but instead, it had drawn attention from something else. Something intelligent, patient, and malevolent. Investigators noted that the symbols burned into the stone floor matched the journal perfectly, implying that whatever had gone wrong was meticulously documented by Sister Margaret before it was too late. Even more unsettling were the small personal items scattered throughout the room: rosaries broken in half, prayer beads charred from fire, and scraps of the nuns' clothing carefully placed in patterns around the chamber. Some of these items bore scorch marks and strange stains that defied scientific explanation. Forensic tests confirmed the materials were decades old, yet the patterns suggested deliberate placement rather than random decay. The room itself seemed to hold a memory, as if it had absorbed the terror and desperation of the sisters, leaving a lingering sense of menace in the air. Finally, the investigators discovered faint inscriptions along the edges of the stone walls, written in Sister Margaret's own hand. They were not prayers, but warnings, cryptic messages about forces beyond comprehension and the cost of attempting to control them. Words like, "It watches," "never complete," and "bound by blood" were scrawled in places that had been overlooked by previous generations. These inscriptions, combined with the journal and artifacts, painted a picture far darker than anyone had imagined. The nuns had not merely disappeared. They had encountered something they could not control, and the evidence of that encounter had been hidden behind the convent walls for more than 75 years. As experts analyzed the hidden chamber, the true nature of the ritual began to emerge. The circle on the floor, the burned candles, and the scattered artifacts were not mere symbols of protection. They were part of an ancient, arcane practice designed to manipulate forces beyond the natural world. Historians trace the patterns to a rare mixture of European mystical traditions combined with Christian iconography, suggesting the sisters had been attempting to summon a protective entity while warding off an evil presence. But the deeper investigators delved, the more it became clear that the ritual had backfired in catastrophic ways. Sister Margaret's journal provided chilling details. The sisters had performed the ritual in secrecy, hoping to shield the convent from an invisible evil that seemed to linger just beyond the walls. Their instructions were precise chants, gestures, and offerings timed with the phases of the moon. Yet, as the ritual progressed, the sisters began to notice that the protective barrier they were creating was attracting something else entirely. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, whispers grew louder, and the air felt electrically charged with unseen energy. Each step of the ritual brought them closer to an unknown threshold, a line they were warned not to cross. Archaeologists and paranormal experts pieced together the mechanics of the ritual. The nuns had intended to bind a protective spirit to the convent, creating a shield that would repel evil influences. But the energy they invoked was far stronger than they anticipated. Rather than contain the spirit, the ritual opened a doorway, a liminal space between life and death. This explained the nuns' disappearance. They were caught in the consequences of their own actions, trapped in a state that defied physical laws. Their bodies vanished, yet the evidence of their struggle, the burned symbols, the scattered artifacts, and the frantic journal entries remained as a warning. The ritual also left behind a lingering presence in the convent. Paranormal investigators who revisited the site reported sensations of being watched, whispers in empty hallways, and cold spots in the basement. Some claimed to hear faint chants echoing through the ruins late at night, repeating words that matched the journal's instructions. It became evident that the sisters had inadvertently bound themselves to the very energy they sought to control. Their disappearance was not a simple vanishing. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a doorway open to a realm that mortals were never meant to enter. Even more disturbing, experts discovered that the ritual's symbols and artifacts had a precise order and placement. Any deviation could cause instability in the spiritual energies. The sisters, desperate and terrified, had followed the instructions to the letter, but fear and panic may have caused subtle errors that escalated the situation beyond repair. The hidden chamber, preserved for decades, was essentially a time capsule of that moment of failure, a frozen snapshot of a ritual gone horrifically wrong. The truth was undeniable. The convent had been the epicenter of a supernatural accident, and the three nuns had paid the ultimate price for their attempt to control forces far beyond their understanding. As investigators combed through the remnants of the hidden chamber, they stumbled upon a set of items that made even seasoned experts uneasy. Carefully folded habits, rosaries, and personal belongings of the missing nuns were arranged in a precise, almost ceremonial pattern along the edges of the ritual circle. It was as if someone, or something, had deliberately placed them there, a silent message left behind for anyone who dared uncover the chamber. The clothing, preserved despite decades of neglect, carried faint scorch marks that matched the patterns burned into the stone floor, hinting at the ritual's violent intensity. DNA testing confirmed that these items belonged to the missing sisters. But there were no remains, no bones, no ashes, nothing to indicate a conventional death. It was as if the sisters had been erased from the physical world, leaving behind only the artifacts of their final moments. Experts were baffled. Skeptics questioned whether the arrangement was the work of a human hand, while paranormal researchers whispered that this was the aftermath of a catastrophic spiritual event, a containment of energy that had displaced the sisters beyond the mortal plane. Every piece of evidence seemed to point to a presence that was still lingering, just beyond perception. More unnerving were the faint scorch marks and strange symbols etched into the walls and floor around the chamber. They suggested that the sisters had struggled, perhaps even attempted to stop whatever had been unleashed during the ritual. Marks that looked like claw scratches or drag lines intertwined with the original symbols hinted at a violent reaction, as if the energy had fought back. Some investigators reported feeling sudden drops in temperature, hairs standing on end, or a pressure in the chest, as if unseen eyes were observing them. The chamber wasn't just a historical artifact. It was alive with residual energy from a catastrophic event decades earlier. The journals revealed that the sisters had understood the stakes. Sister Margaret's last entries spoke of a presence that demanded a toll, something that could not be bargained with or subdued. She described visions of the sisters themselves fading, voices echoing in their minds, and shadows that seemed to move independently. The chilling reality emerged. The sisters hadn't simply disappeared. They had become part of the consequences of their own ritual, trapped in a liminal space where the physical and spiritual worlds intersected. And now, anyone who entered the chamber felt an undeniable connection to their fate, a lingering echo of terror that refused to dissipate. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came in the form of faint impressions in the dust of the chamber, footprints, kneeling postures, and traces of hands pressed against the walls. The investigators couldn't explain how they had formed so perfectly after decades of neglect. It was as if the final moments of the sisters' lives, or their disappearance, were being replayed in silence, frozen for anyone to witness. The evidence left no room for doubt. Whatever had happened here was beyond human comprehension. A disaster born of fear, faith, and forces that mortals should never attempt to control. The convent, long abandoned, had become a tomb, a warning and a puzzle, all in one chilling location. Once the hidden chamber was fully documented, authorities officially declared the 1947 disappearance of the 3 Texas nuns solved. The convent was scheduled for complete demolition, and the evidence collected seemed to provide all the answers anyone could hope for. Yet, even as the case was closed on paper, a sense of unease lingered over Marfa. Residents reported strange phenomena near the ruins. Flickering lights in the dead of night, sudden cold drafts, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing where no one walked. People spoke of an invisible presence, watching, waiting, as though the convent itself refused to let the past rest. Paranormal investigators, who revisited the site described experiences that defied explanation. Some claimed to hear whispers calling their names, soft chants repeating the words from Sister Margaret's journal. Others reported seeing fleeting shadows moving across walls where no one could have been. The hidden chamber, though now exposed, seemed to resonate with energy that wasn't entirely human. Every investigation concluded with more questions than answers, leaving a nagging fear that the sisters were not simply gone. They were somewhere else, bound to the aftermath of a ritual that had gone catastrophically wrong. Locals, particularly the elderly who had lived through the summer of 1947, whispered warnings that no one dared ignore. Children claimed to see figures in nun habits standing silently among the ruins, disappearing when approached. Dogs refused to enter the area, growling at invisible threats, and even vehicles would stall inexplicably near the site. Every detail suggested that the convent was no longer just a building. It had become a threshold, a liminal space between the living and something beyond, preserving the echoes of the sisters' final moments. Fear, it seemed, had become tangible, embedded in the ruins for all who dared draw near. The journals, artifacts, and scorched symbols hinted at a warning the sisters had left behind, one that humanity was perhaps never meant to understand. Investigators speculated that the nuns' disappearance was not an isolated event, but a consequence of meddling with forces beyond mortal comprehension. Even the demolition crews reported strange occurrences, tools disappearing, machinery malfunctioning, and the sensation of being watched from angles that should have been impossible. The convent's secrets, though partially revealed, continued to assert themselves, refusing to be confined by brick, mortar, or time. By the time the last walls were torn down, the site was cleared of rubble, yet the lingering aura remained. Even without the chamber, the scorch marks, or the artifacts, witnesses claimed they could feel the sisters' presence, a silent reminder that some events refused to be buried. Locals avoided the area, wary of shadows, whispers, and the unseen eyes that seemed to linger. The case, solved officially, had left a scar not just on the land, but on the minds of those who had dared to uncover the truth. The sisters' fate remained a chilling mystery, one that decades later continued to haunt Marfa, Texas, and anyone who learned their story. As the dust settled on the demolished convent and the last fragments of its walls were cleared away, one thing became painfully clear. Some mysteries are never truly solved. The sisters' fate may have been uncovered in part, but the whispers in the wind, the flickering shadows, and the lingering sense of presence remind us that the past is never gone. It simply waits. Perhaps the nuns are still out there, trapped in a world between ours and the next, watching, waiting, and guarding the secrets they took with them. And so, the convent may lie in ruins, but the story of that summer in 1947 will continue to haunt Marfa, Texas, and anyone who dares to step too close to what should have remained hidden, because some walls, some rituals, and some disappearances are meant to remain a warning.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.